Sarcoma Stories is a podcast created by Sarcoma Foundation of America to highlight the voices and experiences of patients, survivors, and care partners. After listening, be sure to join our Sarcoma Stories podcast Facebook group to connect with the community and discuss the episode. Follow us and enable notifications on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss new episodes. You can also find all episodes and information on this subtype or your subtype on SFA's website, curesarcoma.org. Links are in this episode's description. On this episode, we're joined by Ken Cleary, an angiosarcoma survivor and amputee. Ken describes the journey to diagnosis, how he made the decision to go forward with an amputation as his frontline treatment, and how he has adapted to life afterward. Ken's reflections on his experience are honest and inspiring, his perspective both grounding and motivating. Of the many topics we discuss, we talk at length about the trust Ken put in his care team while making extremely difficult decisions about how to move forward, and how his care team has helped him through more than just his treatment. His team made such a profound impact that Ken nominated his nurse, Colleen Forbes, to receive SFA's 2026 Compassionate Care Award, which she will be honored with at the 2026 Stand Up to Sarcoma Gala in October. We invite you to listen to Ken's remarkable story, and if you are interested in honoring those who are making strides for the sarcoma community, we invite you to attend the gala this October as well. With that, let's hear from Ken. Welcome to Sarcoma Stories, and welcome back if you're a regular listener. My name is Tasha. I'm one of your hosts.
I'm Katie, your other host.
And today we are joined by Ken Cleary out of Durham, North Carolina. So Ken, would you like to introduce yourself? And I say yourself because we want to get to know you outside of your sarcoma diagnosis as well. So tell us a little about you.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Ken Cleary. I live in North Carolina. I have lived in North Carolina most of my life. Graduated from high school in the mountains of North Carolina and went to school at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And after about a decade working in other various different things, I've found myself back here. I am currently the associate athletic director. So I work in the athletic department here. We handle all of the broadcast needs of the athletic department. So we work with the broadcast partners like ESPN, and then our group also handles all of the bells and whistles that you see in venues. So if you go to a Carolina basketball or football game, all of the LED displays and lights and all that kind of stuff, we handle all of that. I'm married. My wife is a forensic psychiatrist here in North Carolina. And yeah, that's about it. Don't have any kids.
That's really cool. As you're talking, I'm like, I got family in North Carolina and we watch those UNC games. So now I can say I've talked to the guy who's in charge of a lot of things over there.
Only if it's cool. Yeah, if they think it sucks, then yeah,
I love
then
that.
it's somebody else.
I worked in college athletics when I was in college, and it's really cool to get to know the behind the scenes of a lot of the workings of what goes into those major productions.
No doubt. There's a lot of people that have their hands in it. And then you watch something like the Stanley Cup finals, and it's like, oh, wow, I wish we could do this or that or the other. If we had giant projectors to project things on the court, that'd be really cool. We try our
That's
best.
really cool. And I think the work you do in college athletics is going to come back full circles later in this episode when we get a little bit more into your diagnosis. So, could you tell us a little bit about how your sarcoma journey even began?
Sure. I think with prefacing this with everyone's journey is different. It seems like there are some things that hold true in many sarcoma diagnoses, in that it took a while for the medical teams to figure out what exactly it was. I had in December of 2022, I had a lesion that sort of showed up on my shin on my right leg. And it just started off as just like a red spot. And then it started to get a little bit bigger. And eventually there were some blood vessels in my skin that would sort of start coming to the surface and die and slough off. So started with my primary care physician, and then to dermatology, and then to vascular surgery, and no one could quite figure out exactly what it was. The first time in dermatology, they actually did a biopsy on one of the spots. The lesions started to grow. And so from one primary sort of big spot, there were a couple of different other spots that started to appear elsewhere further down my leg. And so they biopsied one of those that looked like it was sort of newer than the older ones, and it came back clean. And so it was like, okay, great. Not sure exactly what this is.
Was it painful to you, or you were just
Not at all.
noticing it on your skin?
Not at
Mhm.
all. No, it didn't really start to get painful until I knew what it
Yeah.
was, until it had been diagnosed. So I guess we can figure out whether that was like my brain doing that or the actual spot. But it started to grow. And so it started to develop a little mass under the skin. I'd gone back to dermatology just for a follow up from the first visit. And they said, yeah, we're not exactly sure what this is, but it could be something related to, potentially pre-diabetes or some other sort of skin condition. And I was like, okay, great. All right, what do I need to do? As part of that process, my primary care physician had checked my blood and my A1C, and all that looked relatively normal. But as I was leaving that appointment, another attending came in to just sort of see what was going on, who had done the first biopsy. And he's like, hey, this spot looks a little bit different than the other ones. And at this point, there was a patch that was probably about an inch in diameter on my leg, and then other little satellite spots that were smaller going from the middle of my shin towards my ankle. And he said, this one looks different than the other one we biopsied. To be safe, let's make sure that we know what this is. So they did the biopsy on that one, and it came back positive for angiosarcoma. So I left that appointment thinking, okay, well, I'll get this news back and we'll figure out whatever it is, but it's not a big deal. And then a couple days later, got that result back, and it was like, okay, this is an incredibly big
Yeah.
deal.
Had you
So
ever heard of sarcoma before, let alone angiosarcoma?
I think I was familiar with the term sarcoma, but not really beyond that. Like if somebody said, oh, sarcoma, that's cancer, but to be able to distinguish that from carcinoma or some other kind of cancer, I would have no idea. Nah.
So they diagnosed you with angiosarcoma. How long was the process from your first symptom to that diagnosis of angiosarcoma?
So Jill, my wife, had noticed it. It's like, oh, you should probably get that checked out. Probably early December of 2022, and then diagnosis was May 30th of 2023. So about 6 months. Yeah.
Was it local when it was diagnosed?
Yes, which was great. A good family friend works for the VA, and there's a VA hospital here. She's a practitioner, and in her training, she had worked with someone who was also doing her residency at the VA here locally. They'd become friends. That was 20 years ago. And they'd maintained a friendship. And it turns out that the person who my family friend Sue was friends with worked in sarcoma in as a radiation oncologist, specifically in sarcoma. And so literally I had gotten the call at like 5 o'clock on a Monday night. I think it was a Monday night. And I was prepared. I was packing actually to go to a work trip. And I got the call on a Monday night. My wife was at the beach. And so I had to call her. I was like, I just got this really weird call. Remember that thing on my leg that we weren't worried about? Well, it turns out it's cancer. And so she's like, okay, I have to call my friend who was supposed to meet me here and tell her that I won't be here and I'll get in the car and be on my way home shortly, which is like a 3 hour drive from our house to where she was at the beach. Um, in the meantime, I'd called my brother and sister to let them know. And my brother said, oh, do you remember Sue's friend who does works something in cancer research or cancer treatment? And I was like, oh, yeah, I sort of remember that. And he had called our friend who called her friend and was like, okay, call her in the morning and we'll figure it out from there. So I called this family friend, and she's like, okay, where are you? And I was like, oh, we live in Durham. And she's like, okay, well, you're pretty close to where I am, so just get here as soon as you can, and we'll get it figured out. So, like literally 24 hours from the time I'd found out, or less than 24 hours, probably closer to 12, from the time I had found out till the time like I had an appointment for at least an initial visit in a sarcoma clinic was less than a day, which is incredibly
Yeah.
lucky. And so from there, we went and ran the gamut between radiation oncology, medical oncology, and the surgical oncologist, and talked through all of the scenarios that I think are very familiar with a lot of people listening to this. It's like, okay, here's what we know is that this has been diagnosed. We are going to need to confirm the diagnosis. We're going to have to run a whole bunch of tests. And once we know that, then we can get back together and we'll figure out a course of treatment. But we don't know anything about staging. We don't know anything about it yet. But, here are all of the things that this could be. And then the big issue is going to be whether it hasn't metastasized to your lungs or
Yeah.
not. And that started the process of getting all different tests. It started with an MRI and then a CT and PET scan, and all of that took about 10 days to.
The initial moments of diagnosis, there's so much that happens at that time, and a lot of conversations that have to happen. And you're right, it is incredible that you had a family friend who could be a guiding light throughout that and help you find the right path. But could you share a little bit about those conversations and how you arrived at the decisions you made to go forward in your treatment plan, which for our listeners ended up being an amputation below the knee? But could you talk a little bit about those conversations? Because that's a big decision to make. And I think there are listeners out there who have either had to make similar decisions or are making those decisions. And I think it's always helpful to hear someone's perspective.
Obviously, as anybody who's been through this, your head is just sort of swimming with everything. And then I do think it was very helpful on that very first day that all of the treatment options were all sort of spelled out for us. And it's like, once we figure out what this is, it could take on a variety of different treatment plans. There could be radiation and chemo. But one of the things that first came up was that maybe surgery in your future. And one of the surgical decisions may wind up being whether there's an amputation or not. And so I am actually quite thankful that on that very first day, that was introduced as an option. So I had lots of time to think about that. And I remember telling Jill that as we got home from that very first day's appointments, I'm like, well, not knowing what this is and knowing what all of the potential outcomes might be from this, that like if, surgery is something that may happen, and if I have to have my leg amputated, that's going to be, I think I'm going to be okay with that, because if that is the best treatment course, then I think I'm going to be okay with that. That was probably my initial, like, well, if I have to get out of this, this is how I'm going to get out of this kind of thing, without thinking through any of the consequences and any of the things that might come with that later on, which were probably over the course of the next couple weeks, because through that process, we got the MRI results back, which happened a couple days after our initial visit. They were able to confirm what it was, but still didn't know anything other than, yes, this is a tumor in your leg, but they still hadn't had a PET scan. So I think it was June 9th of 2023 when I had my PET scan. And that was the first time that we knew that there hadn't been any metastasis. So obviously that was a huge relief in that time. But then shortly thereafter, the hospital where I was being treated, they had their tumor board and put all that together. And our friend actually called and said, okay, here's what the recommendation is. And so that was probably about 2 weeks after diagnosis. My surgery was 1 month after I'd found out my diagnosis. And so that was right in the middle, probably about 2 weeks. So then at that point, I had 2 weeks to really think about, okay, this is actually going to happen now. There was a little period of time, probably about a week, where it's like, okay, well, this isn't the worst case scenario right now. So that's great. And then, so we'll see what they recommend. And then about a week later, it's like, okay, well, the recommendation is to do an above knee amputation. So I was like, oh, okay.
And there wasn't any chemotherapy recommendation out of precaution. Yours was the amputation.
Yeah. It was that was it. We asked, and I was given an option to think about if I wanted to choose chemo and radiation. But as it was explained to me, that based on the nature of the tumor and it being in the blood vessels, that like the radiation would sort of have to be from my knee to my ankle. And since it's in the blood vessels, they don't know exactly how much it's traveled. It was multifocal and a fairly large tumor by the time that they had discovered, because obviously you could see it bulging out of my skin in addition to the blood vessels coming to the surface. And so, as it was explained to me, radiation was going to be pretty difficult to undergo for me. And just basically the size of the area that they would have to radiate would basically render my leg sort of useless anyway. The quality of life that I would have had, even if that did treat the disease, the quality of life with that, with what I would have come out of that with, was going to be pretty challenging.
Yeah, there's a whole
So,
host of side effects to consider, both with chemotherapy
yeah,
and radiation, that can impact people long term. So
yeah,
it's really a
yeah.
personal decision on how people wanna approach that.
And as I was explained to me, and coming from someone who was a radiation oncologist and treats people like this for a living, who I'd then developed a relationship with, when she's telling me all of this information, it's like, okay, well, I get it. I understand. And the quality of life on the other side of whatever this treatment is, for as long as it is going to be important. And she's like, there's a chance, or a good chance, that we could do radiation, when you go radiation chemo, and maybe the, the treatment is as good as it can possibly be, but a year later, 2 years later, you might be in so much pain based on the outcomes of that, that you're going to want to do this
Right.
anyway.
Right.
uh, so after hearing all of that and thinking about it a little bit, talking about it a little bit, and you've got a room full of people who treat sarcoma for a living, um, and all their recommendation is that this is the best way to do it, then I'm going to believe them and go, okay, well, I want the best opportunity for the best outcome out of this. And if this is what they're recommending, then that's what I'm going to go
Yeah,
with.
and the best outcome in terms of treating the disease, but also your quality of life afterwards. Because I think a lot of
Yeah.
times, maybe not a lot of times, but I think there could be, and at least for me, before I was living in the sarcoma world, a misconception was that amputation would lead to not as great of a quality of life. But from what I have heard from amputees, it's actually the opposite of like quality of life could be much more severely impacted without the amputation, kind of like you were describing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an interesting thing to think about when you're making these decisions. Is it's so personal, but like how do you see your goals? We had another guest on almost a year ago who talked about what his goals were post treatment, and the surgery, actually the amputation ended up being something that would lead to those goals versus doing another course of treatment.
Yeah, and we may get into this a little bit later, but the the things that this diagnosis and the gifts that this diagnosis and treatment have given me are really important and have changed my life for the
Yeah.
better. And no one would ever want it. And I wouldn't want it. I would much rather have two legs and be walking around normally. But there's a lot that I've gotten out of this, and that I've learned about myself and how things in my life have changed because of this, that I'm incredibly grateful for.
You mentioned in the beginning of our conversation that, like many sarcoma patients, it kinda took a while to get to the diagnosis, and then once you get the diagnosis, it really becomes like go time. So I think you said once you
Yeah.
had it, it was like 2 weeks before you had the amputation surgery. If you could kinda talk a bit about how do they prepare you for that, or how do you prepare for that?
Yeah. So it was 1 month, May 30th to June 30th, between when I first found out my diagnosis to the surgery. I had the MRI PET scan in about 10 days, within 10 days of that, and then about a week later. So it was probably about 10 days between when we had made the decision and surgery. I had a little bit of a heads up. Again, our friend had called the day before, was the big, sort of follow up. Here's what our recommendation is going to be. And she said, just so you know, when you come in, this is going to be the recommendation. So you don't have to decide when you come in, but this is what we're going to talk about as the best way to treat this. So I was ready for that. But yeah, going in there, I could still vividly remember sitting there in the treatment room and just going, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but yes, we're going to follow your recommendation and we are going to proceed with the amputation. And I was completely freaked out. I asked the surgeon, which is embarrassing because my surgeon is an absolute rock star. She is awesome and is a leader in this field. And I was like, "So have you done many of these?" And it's like, yeah. I do this for a living. I do plenty, and this is as it turns out, like the types of surgery she does, like an above knee amputation, is like something she can do almost in her sleep, I think. But yeah, she is absolutely awesome. But there was a bunch of things like that had happened, and that was the first time I really remember meeting Colleen Forbes, who we'll talk about a little bit later, because that's when the paperwork started, and then you had to think through all of the practical things from there of when's it going to happen and what do we need to do for FMLA and how does all of this work and what about insurance and all of that kind of stuff. So there was like a practical part that sort of ramped up in that sort of 10-day window. But also just the emotional parts of it.
Yeah, you mentioned Colleen, and I think this is a fine time to mention that Colleen is the recipient of the 2026 Compassionate Care Award that SFA will give her at our gala in October. And Ken, you nominated Colleen for the award along with several other people. And so maybe share with us a bit about, you said you needed Colleen at that point, and I know she's continued to be a resource for you, but what did you need from her? What was the support that you now see was so valuable?
Yeah, I mean, so much of it was initially just logistical. My wife is a physician as well, and so her trying to figure out FMLA, and we both are state employees, so there's some hoops to jump through for all of that kind of stuff. Just figuring out insurance and all the paperwork that we had to sign. So the first day, my head is swimming with all of these things, and at that point, you're almost tired of crying. But Colleen was just there and like steadying force to just help us through all of that. She led us through all of practical logistics, but with such care and compassion and grace that it really helped calm me in the process. It's probably close to exactly 3 years now from when I had that appointment where we made the decision and signed the papers. And I can still hear her voice in my head. And now knowing her, like, oh yeah, that's Colleen. That's what it is. She was able to handle all of this stuff and was able to answer every question and was able to know what we needed to do, but at the same time do it with just the greatest amount of compassion that you've just felt the calming presence.
Yeah, that line between giving care and also being a human and being both of those things for somebody in such a steadying way when you're going through such an overwhelming process. You have to make so many logistical decisions and fill out so much paperwork at a time where you're also going through the most potentially stressful and emotional thing you've had to process. That how do you possibly do that with a clear head without an outside force who both understands and can provide their expertise? It's just such an invaluable resource. And we talk about healthcare workers being heroes, but I don't think you can fully understand what that means until you're sitting in that position needing their assistance.
There's no question about it. And the part that I never fathomed, that doing some volunteer work and being around people a little bit more after, um, is that it was obviously the only thing that I thought about for that month and obviously after. And it was like I was living in two worlds. I was living in the person with cancer world where that was the only thing I really ever thought about. And then I would talk to people and I was my normal me. But those worlds, there was a giant wall between them. And if I was interacting with someone, I was myself. But otherwise, I was in this just sort of a cloud. That was my mindset. But the thing I didn't realize till after is that there's multiple people that they're dealing with on a daily basis that are in this exact same situation. As it turns out, in even more dire situation than I was in, an even more challenging situation than I was in. On a clinic day, they may see people from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. every 20 minutes. There's so many people that they're dealing with that to be able to handle that day in, day out, week in, week out, with that level of compassionate care is just amazing. I was a very small part of what they deal with on a daily basis. And it was obviously my whole life and so important to me. And I felt that love and care throughout the process. And to be able to have so much of that in you that and so much energy to be able to dedicate to that is just absolutely amazing. And I couldn't be more grateful
You
for
bring
it.
up such a good point too of how many people they see and being able to channel that compassion into each person so that they feel like they're the only
Yeah.
person in the world going through this is actually so
Yeah.
remarkable. I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that every time I meet with my team, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I literally forget you see hundreds of people because you make me feel like I'm the only person that you care for." And that's a skill. I mean, you can also feel very rushed in certain appointments, and to not feel that is such a skill, but also such a humanness that they're people
Yeah.
too and can hold space for that many people. I think that's why that recognition is so deserved and needs to be acknowledged because that's an incredibly hard thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, work scenarios come up for me that are obviously not um, life altering things, but you have a meeting about the same subject 3 times and nothing got sorted out, or the conversation keeps going. It's like, I can't take any more of this. And it's like, well, that was 30-minute meetings about something that is completely not important in the grand scheme of things. And like, I'm at my wit's end with that. But to be able to go into a treatment room multiple times a day, multiple times a week, and to have these conversations, and people are having these difficult conversations, and with that, that level of understanding is, yeah, award winning.
Yeah, Tosh and I have had those conversations of a diagnosis of sarcoma or whatever diagnosis somebody's facing will really put into perspective the other challenges of life. And
Yeah,
especially in the work setting, you just really see what's worth worrying about and what's not. And I completely agree with you. I tell my team, I don't know how you all do this all day, every day. It's got to be so exhausting to carry the worry and the concern, but also show your support for the patients and make them feel like you're their best friend.
yeah, yeah. It is absolutely. That's one of the gifts that I was referring to, Katie. Is it did change my perspective for so long. My wife would say that I worked too much and work was what I did. And it was in a lot of ways my identity. And that's one of the things that one of the gifts that I've received from this is to put that in a more healthy perspective for me, which has been amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to learn more about the gifts, but also would love to hear a little bit about getting to the decision to go forward with the amputation. So, what
Mhm.
has that process, if you could take us back to actually going forward with the surgery and then how you've adapted to life after that decision was made?
Sure. So in that last week, I sort of had a week to say goodbye to my leg, and we tried to do as many things as possible. I had just bought a new set of golf clubs that I hadn't actually used yet, and Bubba Cunningham, who was just retired here as the athletic director at Carolina, was absolutely amazing in this process. He's just an awesome guy and was absolutely amazing in this process. He called me as soon as I had started telling people what was going on. He just wanted to make sure that I was okay and check in with me. And he checked in with me throughout the process. But I had mentioned to him that I just bought golf clubs that I hadn't used. I was like, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to play golf again or when that might be or whatever. He's like, well, you should play definitely before you go. So he's like, anywhere you want to play, just let me know and I'll make it happen. And he's like, do you want to go to Pinehurst? Do you want to go here? Do you want to go there? And there's a private golf course called Old Chatham here that just hosted the Senior Amateur Open, and it hosts a couple of professional tournaments a year. you can't play there unless you're a member, and he happens to be a member there. I was like, I'd really like to play at Old Chatham. He's like, are you sure? So that was one evening, and called the next morning. He's like, all right, here, you got tea time whenever you want. Just let me know. So 3 friends of mine, I put together a foursome as quickly as I could. My surgery was on a Friday, and this was the Tuesday before. So the four of us went out and played golf at Old Chatham, ate lunch, and it was the perfect day in June in North Carolina. It wasn't too hot. It wasn't too humid. It was awesome. And then finished our round of golf, and Bubba just arrives and sat out with us on the patio as we had a couple beers after finishing the round. It was one of those perfect days that I was able to do something I wanted to do with great people in a great scenario, and it was an amazing way to send my leg off. And I'm just so fortunate to have so many people that care about me, people coming by and just hanging out. And I'm a fairly extroverted person. I don't like being just by myself a lot. And so just having people come around and sort of hang out and don't need to do anything special. I didn't go skydiving or water skiing or anything. I just want to be around people. And that had so much in that last week before surgery. I mean, including my brother. My brother lives in Delaware. My sister lives in New Jersey. They came down to stay with us the day before surgery, so got to hang out with them a little bit the night before and then quite a bit after. But yeah, so that week was some logistics, but a lot of just like, this is what's going to happen. Let's hang out with as many people and do as many things as we can before it happens.
Was there
So
any grief in that week? There's so many beautiful, special moments you had and you're describing, but with that anticipation of what was to come, was there any grief of life is about to change and before and after, or what were those emotions like?
uh,
And there's
you
okay
know,
if there's not. That's part of the question too. Like maybe there
yeah,
wasn't, and that's a misconception of mine.
I think there was more, as I recall, it was a lot more anxiety than it was grief. And I think some of that may be, I can be fairly logistical in my thought process and go, okay, well, you know, we're at this point on the flow chart and this means this, and we're going to do this and move down to the next square. I think there was a lot more anxiety on my part that what if I have this surgery and still there's more to come from a cancer perspective. I think that was the anxiety of, this is what I got to do to put it in a binary yes no. If this what gets me to know more, then okay, I'm all right with that. But what if it doesn't? And I think there was a lot of what ifs, that obviously not just through the surgery, but for years to come, of what if. And so I do remember distinctly the anxiety of that more than anything.
Yeah, which is not uncommon for anybody diagnosed with any kind of cancers. You wish it were black and white of just, yes, no, this works, this doesn't work, but it's so
Yeah.
gray
Yeah.
so much of the time, and you have to
Yeah.
make such
Yeah.
serious, hard decisions that are life altering being in a gray area.
Yeah.
And to have to make a hard decision, a life altering decision in something that's going to remain gray is so anxiety inducing. So, how have you kind of coped with that, I guess, even going through the amputation, and has it changed at all since your amputation?
Yeah, I think shout out to therapy,
Yes.
because that was really important. The hospital where I was treated has an integrated cancer treatment program. So there was therapy available to me immediately in a variety of different ways. There were some support group sessions as well as individual one-on-one therapy, which I tried to take advantage of. And that really helped as much as anything to just figure out where I was, what was going on. So that was from diagnosis. They were okay. Well, somebody will reach out to you to talk about this. We'll talk about therapy, and that happened within probably 3 days of my first visit to the clinic. Set up the first therapy appointment, and the message that still resonates with me is that you're doing everything you can. You're getting the best care possible, and it doesn't matter how you got here, but you know what you know, and you're doing everything that you can to try to attack this
Yeah.
situation. And that brought just an incredible amount of, as simple as it is, that you don't have to think through all of the things. You just know that you trust your care team and you're doing everything that you can and you're making all the right decisions based on all the information you
Yeah.
have.
You're
Great.
doing the best you can with the information you know, and it's, like you
Yeah.
said, so
Yeah.
simple, but sometimes you have to be
Yeah.
reminded that that's what you can do. My oncologist always said, "Control the
Yeah.
controllables," and that's a controllable.
Yeah. 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 And in fact, I wrote from that very first therapy. So I was sitting here at my desk, and in that very first therapy session, I wrote down some notes from that, and that piece of paper is still right here in my
Oh,
wallet.
wow.
So I just carry those notes. In fact, to a to a hockey game a couple of years ago, and that piece of paper, as I was going through like the scanner, which is absurd because I laugh every time I go through a scanner. At this point, it's like, yeah, I have a giant metal thing on my leg right now, so I'm pretty sure it's going to go off, but they make you go through it. But I was putting my wallet in the little thing as you go through the scanner, and the piece of paper fell out. And it's like tons of people going through in every direction. It's like, no, I gotta have that. Like, I'm gonna dive on it if I need to, but that thing has to stay with me. It's my security blanket. So I still carry it every day. Yeah. But therapy was great. Therapy was incredibly helpful. A lot of meditation, which was also very helpful. There's so many mindfulness apps available right now that was incredibly helpful for me to just get myself grounded and centered and do some breathing exercises and all of those things. So all of that really, really helped me through a lot of that anxiety that we were
Yeah.
talking about.
Can I ask, were you a mindfulness breathing exercise guy before all this?
I was, yeah, yeah, a little bit. I'd been introduced to it a few years before. I go through bouts of anxiety where I would just need to slow it down a little bit. It was originally just like, okay, it's got to be the caffeine, so I'm just going to go caffeine free for 3 months, and sometimes that would help. But then somebody introduced me to like, hey, have you tried one of these apps where you can just sit for 10 minutes and listen to someone and close your eyes and breathe? And so thankfully I was familiar with it by the time I got to diagnosis time, because again, invaluable and it's great. And I don't do nearly enough of it now as I should, but it is incredibly helpful. But I do go back to it every time I
Yeah.
need it.
I ask because I teach Pilates and yoga, and I have a very difficult time with breathing exercises and mindfulness if it's not in an active setting, which throughout my diagnosis was an extremely hard thing because I couldn't move as much as I would like.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
like, well, actually, not feel like, I know there is so much evidence around breathing exercises and mindfulness. Like, there is
Yeah.
research on this that says it's helpful, and I think a lot of us are resistant to it because it requires you to sit with hard things, and that's so
Yeah.
challenging, and as a professional in that field, I find it so difficult to do, and so you're talking about it, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what is one piece of advice you would give to someone, knowing how beneficial this is, to access that in a way that doesn't feel so intimidating?"
To just be able to calm yourself and to yeah. Yeah, it's, I mean, even just the simple, I was doing it the other day and I can't remember what scenario I was in, where it's just, the box
Mm,
breathing of, in for 4 or hold for 6, out for, or hold for 4, out
mhm.
for 6, hold for 4, and just do that for 2
Yes.
minutes. And again, I don't practice nearly as much as I should, but just doing those breathing exercises can just calm you right down. And sort of once you're aware of what it can do for you and you do it, you're like, oh, wow. Yeah.
Box breathing is always what I recommend to beginners. Like, if you're like, "Ugh, I'm so resistant to this, but I should try it because I know it's good for me." Box breathing is like one of the most
Yeah.
accessible ones. I love that.
It's so easy.
That's
Yeah.
good.
And I can remember many times just sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset and just doing that, just in a circle.
Ah, so good.
So, yeah.
So, you work in college athletics. Do you play sports? Have you played sports in your life leading up to the amputation?
I'm 56, so there isn't a lot of competitive athletics, but I've always been a sports fan. I've worked in and around really my entire professional career since I was an athletic trainer. I was an athletic trainer in high school. And when I came to Carolina, I was an athletic trainer as an undergraduate for our football program because I thought I wanted to get into sports medicine as a career. I quickly realized I liked the sports part of it more than the medicine part. So I wound up being a journalism major here at school, but I continued my athletic training through my undergrad years. So I've been around sports and athletes my entire life. Yeah.
What has that been like post amputation? How have you adjusted to life post amputation, especially in the athletics realm?
I think another gift I've received, speaking of gifts, is that having been around athletes and coaches really my entire life and professionally for the last 30 some odd years, just the athlete mindset of you continue to push yourself. I can't tell you how many Roy Williams press conferences I sat through and just listened to him and the impact he's had on my life in a way that he would never know. Just the way that he approached things and the way that he is driven to just constantly get better and the way that he was able to instill that in the student athletes that he coached. And those kinds of things are invaluable, absolutely invaluable to motivate me through, okay, what am I going to do today to get better? What has the doctor told me that I need to do? Because it's going to help me get better. Post amputation, there's so much time that you just lay on your back and then lay on your stomach to make sure that your hip is settling okay. And so it's 90 minutes a day flat on my back and 90 minutes a day on my stomach and those kinds of things. It's like, okay, this is what I have to do to get better. And then when you get into PT, the physical therapist that I worked with, Stephen, who was my primary PT practitioner, was a college basketball player. And so that resonated with me so much. What can you do to get just one step better today? What can you do to improve your balance one little bit? What kind of metrics? And it doesn't have to be metrics as much as, do I feel like I improved today? Kind of thing, which I credit being working athletics and being around, 18 to 22-year-olds pretty much constantly who are driven to not only be the best in their sport, but also to be great in the classroom and those kinds of things. College athletes are absolutely amazing. And being around them provided me in a ways that I wasn't necessarily conscious of it, but just like, hey, what do I need to do today to be a little bit better? How can I, whatever it is, I did about a week and a half of inpatient rehab. And when you're doing the crutch tests or the walker tests and the first day versus day 3 when they tested me again versus on the way out, like how much better have I gotten? How can I be better at this today? And some of it's just the simple stuff. How much help did it require for me to take a shower the first time I was able to after surgery? And then how long is it going to take me to take a shower independently? Both trying to get through the logistics, but also like, am I comfortable enough to do this? So it's not only just the endurance and the physical stuff, but more like, how can I get to the point that I can be independent and how quickly can I
Yeah.
get there? Being around athletes in athletics is the gift that gave me.
Have you been able to get back to the activities that you enjoy? You talked about golf. You're a couple years post amputation now. So, what does life look like for you in the activities that brought you joy before?
Yeah. I play golf not nearly as much as I want, but I'm trying to think the first time I was back out there may have been. There was a Strikeout for Sarcoma golf event here in the Triangle of North Carolina the May after my surgery, probably 11 months. And that was the first time I was back out on the golf course. To bring up Colleen again, in addition to all of that stuff we talked about, how awesome she was like the primary organizer of a sold out golf fundraiser, which there are people who do that for a living. And she organized the golf tournament along with other people, a lot of her coworkers in the foundation that supports the hospital. But she put that together, and that was the first time that I was back on the golf course. And I've played a bunch since then, but thankfully that was a motivating factor for me to like, okay, they're going to do a golf tournament in the spring and I'm going to play. I don't care how hard it is and what I'm able to do, but I'm going to get out there and do it. And I was able to play. It was awesome.
Awesome. What would you tell somebody who's newly post amputation to just kind of help them take those steps that you've taken to get to where you are today?
I think to go back to the therapy discussion, I think if as you're going through it, to really just recognize that you're doing the best you can. You're doing everything that you can do to try to work your way through whatever your diagnosis is. I feel incredibly fortunate to have the treatment course that I did. Find your support, find things that help you through it, whether that's therapy or meditation or exercise or whatever those things are. Find the things, accept support when it's offered, build your team, um, of people who can help you. Don't be too proud to say, oh, I don't need therapy. I can do this, or whatever that is. Accept support where you can. There's so many resources and so many people out there that can help you. The Amputee Coalition does a great amount of stuff. SFA has so many resources. There's so many different places out there where you can get information and you can get help. So accept the help where you need it. And something that I found incredibly helpful was, and again, I'm really lucky in that my wife is a physician, but I have to this day not done one bit of research on sarcoma myself. I just knew me as a person that, like, every time I have a cold, I'm a WebMD and okay, well, what's the worst case scenario could happen here? And I made that decision very early in the process that I'm going to trust my care team. I'm going to trust my wife, and she's going to, obviously, she knows a ton about it that we haven't ever discussed. But I knew myself and I knew that, like, it's not going to be healthy for me to sit here and dig into every last iota of sarcoma research and to figure out, like, what are the potential outcomes and what does this mean? And they said this word and let me look that up and all those kinds of things. So I made that decision from the very beginning that I was going to ask the questions of the people who I trusted and they were fine. And that, to me, just in terms of, I don't know, peace of mind is probably not right, but in terms of, like, how it helped my disposition, and my ability to go through this, to navigate this journey, was the right decision for me. I feel really strongly about that. So I would say that's another thing I would tell people is you don't feel like that you have to know everything about what's going on. You've made the right decision. If you're comfortable with your care team and you feel like that they have a good handle on what's going on, that you can trust them and you don't have to know everything.
Think that's actually a really good piece of advice that, like, you can be active in your care and the decision making without being overwhelmed with information if you delegate it appropriately to the appropriate
Yeah.
people. And it sounds like for you,
Yeah.
your wife is one of them, your care team is them
Yeah.
too. But I think that's a good point because there's this important piece of making informed decisions while also knowing and advocating for yourself what information is going to be helpful to me as the patient to know and not know, and make those decisions with peace of mind and feeling satisfied that I feel grounded in the choices I'm making without being overburdened by the information that could cause the spiral of the what ifs and uproot your mental health.
Yeah.
That's such
Yeah.
a hugely important part of it. So I'm glad you mentioned that because there is information out there that can
Yeah.
throw you off course if it's not the right information you're ready to receive.
Yeah, and I think it's also important for people, whatever is right for you is
Yeah.
okay. That I knew just as I got into it, I knew for me was the right decision. There's some people, sort of like the people who have a fear of flying, like, do a bunch of research on how airplanes work and air pressure above and below the wing and all that kind of stuff, and it makes them more comfortable. There may be people out there who once they understand all of that stuff and want to know every little bit of their diagnosis and how it all works and all of that, that's the right decision for them. But for me, it wasn't. And I think the most important thing is there is no right way to handle it. There's what's right for
Totally.
you. And that's
Yeah.
great.
I suspect, given that you said earlier you're extrovert in the questionnaire that you submit to us beforehand, that paying it forward is also probably a part of your journey that you find value in. So you're involved with amputee groups or visiting the hospital, the sarcoma center. You were treated at sharing your journey. Am I correct in saying that? And is that another gift, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other parts that came out of my therapy is sort of developing a mantra and figuring out where you are and what's going on. And one of the things that came to my head in that process was what I wanted to do with my life, whatever my life was following treatment. And thankfully, like, I'll tell a funny story. After my follow up after surgery, and again, my surgeon, absolute rock star. She's awesome. I still can't see her and Colleen without getting emotional every time I see them. And even at a sarcoma event, like a fundraising 5K, I saw my doctor and I was like, at some point, I'm going to be able to hang out and, like, see you and talk to you without starting to cry. That today is not that day,
but there is going to be some point that that's going to happen, and just, overwhelmed with joy and gratitude for what she's done for me. But when we had the follow-up with her 2 weeks after surgery or whatever, and the pathology report, and I'd gotten it in my chart, so we'd read it, but I didn't really understand the significance of it. And so she came in and sat down just absolutely beaming. She's like, have you guys seen the pathology report? And she pulls out of her pocket and she's like, did you see all this margin? And I can't remember. I think it was 20 centimeters of margin between the tumor and the amputation. And she pulled it out like just absolutely beaming. Like she was the proudest person, like such good news. And it was like a kid coming home, like with an A on her report card, just pulling it out. It's like, look how great this is. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. There's some positive news that has come out of this right now in terms of that long-term anxiety. But what came out of my therapy in this process was the other thing written on my paper, that you're doing everything that you can, was live more, love more, learn more, and contribute more. Those were the things that I wanted to try to I won't say change my life, but like to direct my life a little bit more. And so I try to do that in every way. And the contribute more is really important to me, because before I was probably a little bit of a workaholic. I always said there'll be time for doing this. And it's like, oh, I would like to volunteer in whatever way. And before cancer, I didn't do it very much. I didn't contribute all that much. And I wanted to live more, to do more things. We went on a safari last summer. I just got back from a trip to Italy and Spain. So I wanted to travel more. I wanted to love more in a way that, like, I want the people around me to know how much I appreciate them and to spend time with them. And I want to learn more, and like just in any way that I can, if there's a way that can help me live and love and contribute more, if there's ways I can learn about things to help me. But contribute is really important to me. And it's given me the ability to go, okay, this is something I wanted to do, but I never really knew how to have a focus for this is what I want to do. So through the Amputee Coalition, I did their certified peer visitor program. And then at the hospital where I was treated, I went through their volunteer program. And so I've been doing peer visits for amputees now for about 6 months. And that, I will say that the peer visit on that day, I was visited by a limb loss nurse and a peer visitor from the Amputee Coalition, because they knew that we were going to choose amputation as the treatment course, and incredibly helpful. And I was like, okay, well, that is something that I would love to, that is a way for me to contribute. So I went through the process. And so I've been doing that now for about 6 months, both, for amputees and for any way, but I email Colleen every couple of weeks, and just like, if there's anybody coming through that needs someone, particularly who's pre or post-op, that needs someone to talk to, I'm always here. So please let me know. Dave Ingram was the guy who visited me and said, there isn't anything you're not going to be able to do post-amputation. There's only 2 things that you need to be able to do it. And it's right here. And he pointed to his head and pointed to his chest. And it's like, the only thing is if you believe it and you have the heart to do it, then you're going to be able to do anything you want. And that's the message that I leave every peer visit with at this point. Camden Bailey was a young man who was in school here at Carolina, and he was a football manager, was diagnosed with sarcoma in his leg when he was in high school. He had an amputation, and Coach Mac Brown was our football coach at the time, introduced me to Camden as a manager when I was still in a wheelchair. It was after surgery, pre-prosthetic, when I first came back to work. And he was the first amputee I'd met in the wild, like, out in life. And unfortunately, his cancer had metastasized, and he passed away, I think, in December of last year. But reading about his story and meeting him, he came back for a football game last fall, and I met him and chatted with him, took a picture with him. And at that point, his family had known what the outcome was going to be. He'd set up a foundation, and this is an early 20s young man who knew, okay, well, this is what's going to happen, but I want to do things to fund scholarships and fund research. As a 20-something who could have just been said, hey, I don't, this isn't fair. And it's not. But somebody who wanted, again, to contribute to our cause moving forward. And so Camden Bailey is someone who is is often in my thoughts because he's the first person I talked to that walked on a prosthesis, that had cancer surgery and lost his leg, and could tell me a little bit about what was going on. And he was a manager for a football team, was running around, and he won a state championship as a quarterback at his high school after having his leg amputated. I think that's right. Or he continued to play. And again, those stories are absolutely amazing. So that was another story that motivates me to continue to try and help where I can, and that he had an incredible impact on my life, both in person, and what his legacy is important. I've never told him that because I never really realized it. But yeah, there's so many stories out there, and so many important ones, and so many people who try their best to help our lives be better with the sacrifices that they've made and the challenges that they faced and the way in which they faced them. So
It's a beautiful acknowledgement of Camden, and I think a really good example of how your legacy can live on. Really speaks to what you were saying about if it's here in your head and your heart, you can make it happen.
the other thing that I've been working with is the Neuromuscular Rehabilitation Engineering Lab at NC State. There's a joint program between NC State and UNC where they do prosthetics research. So I try to, anytime they have a study that they need an above knee amputee for, I try to make time to be able to do that. I have an awesome microprocessor knee that took a long time for insurance to agree that I needed, but I have it and it's great. And there's a lot of people that had to go through amputations and prosthetics that weren't as advanced as mine. So if there's something I can do to help them on the research end to be able to provide that benefit to whoever this happens to in the future, that there's an even better prosthetic, then I'm happy to do that.
They're incredibly powerful contributions. There's so much value in peer support, especially with something like this. But the research side of it, oh gosh, we could have a whole other hour-long podcast on research
Yeah.
and the insurance and whatnot. So your contributions to that really make a difference for the future of prosthetics and the engineering of them. I like the way you described the love more of making sure people know that they are appreciated, because this is exactly what you're doing with the nomination for Colleen. What an incredible way to show your appreciation and your love for the care that she's given you. So, with the gala coming up, what are you most looking forward to celebrating that night?
Yeah, I think obviously an opportunity to celebrate Colleen with all of her coworkers, her peers that will be able to be there, and just an opportunity not only to say thank you to her, but to thank you to all of the people who try to help people that are in our situation. Again, we talked about how I'm one person of maybe 8 or 10 or a dozen that they see on a daily basis, but then all of the caregivers in that room, who you multiply that times all of the people treating sarcoma, and how much that they're doing to try to help people in our situations, that it's absolutely an opportunity to just say thank you for all that you do.
Totally.
I'm very much looking forward to that.
That's great. And I think this is a good opportunity to share with our listeners that anybody can attend the gala. Tickets are live. We'll link everything. So you'd be able to meet Ken in person if you're coming to the gala and
Yeah.
get to see
Uh,
Colleen
I'm not sure you're selling tickets with that, but
and see Colleen and help recognize her and so many others in the community. But you bring up a really good point there, like just how many people are working to support sarcoma, and the sarcoma community and sarcoma patients is absolutely incredible. And I think sometimes with such a scary diagnosis, you can forget how many people are working to make it better. And it really is such an opportunity, this event, to acknowledge the progress being made and the work being done and the people who are dedicating their lives to doing it. I think that is really a special thing to acknowledge when we feel like we aren't getting answers fast enough and treatment options fast enough. There are so many people working so hard to do that. And it's a good reminder that we are also contributing to that by sharing our stories. This is part of why we do this podcast, is the voices of the people who are most impacted makes a difference.
yeah, we need to continue funding science. We need to support research in all of the ways that is possible, both from an individual standpoint and from larger organizations. We need to continue to fund
Right.
research. We're all beneficiaries of it. I may have been treated differently in different ways. I may have had an outcome that there may have been different complications from my diagnosis that they wouldn't have known answers to, but funding science and funding research help that. And that needs to continue to
Well,
happen.
it's what allows the people who are working so hard to continue the work and support the community and the patients and the people most affected and to have more outcomes like yours
Yeah.
and like mine and many others. So
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more on that. And this is such an important time to be acknowledging that. So as we stand up in October at the gala, recognizing all of these people and the work that's being done, also acknowledging that it is so important to continue funding that work to get to even better outcomes and better treatment options for so many people.
Completely agree. And even, I mean, post amputation, mobility issues, and all those people who either go through limb loss or limb salvage and need to learn how to walk again, and all those research helps all of those things. So, yeah, absolutely.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. And like I said, we could probably do a whole other hour-long podcast episode about those challenges too. So I want to ask before we wrap it up with our final questions, is there anything that you feel like in this episode you would want to touch on that we haven't touched on already?
One thing I want to do is I would be remiss in this without giving a shout out to the Move for Gen Foundation. I don't know
Yeah,
if you guys, I'm guessing
I
Jen
was
Andy,
gonna
you've
ask.
probably been a guest.
I was totally gonna ask if you were
Yeah.
connected to Move for Jen. We've had a few guests on here. I know Jen myself. She's amazing. So yes, tell us more. Tell our listeners more because Move for Jen's a great resource.
They are absolutely awesome. My sister discovered Move for Gen shortly after my diagnosis. And she's like, "Do you know this person? She's in North
Yeah.
Carolina." I was like, no. But since I've played in their spring golf tournament, I was out of town this year, so I couldn't go this year, but I played in 2025. A group of us drove down to Charlotte to play in the golf tournament. Jen is absolutely amazing. Her energy, and there's so many stories like that of people in the sarcoma world who have, and again, I would say a role model for me in my journey of someone who took a cancer diagnosis and potentially devastating information through great treatment and great fortune has emerged on the other side of it, but hasn't forgotten it and has tried to figure out ways to give back throughout. They provide support for people who need activewear prosthetics. And again, in that next hour-long conversation about insurance, that insurance doesn't necessarily cover a lot of activewear. And so particularly for people who may want a running blade but need a regular leg and they're forced to go out of pocket and they're expensive. And so Move for Gen raises money and provides grants for people for activewear prosthetics to do all of the things, because I think it's important, as we talked about, how do you get back into your life and how do you do things? Well, if you were a runner, you want to run again. If you were a skier, you want to ski again. And so Move for Gen is absolutely critical in doing that. And I'm so grateful for people like that in the world, and in some small way, I hope to follow in their footsteps a little bit.
I undoubtedly know that you are. Ken, this has been such a good conversation. I'm so excited for the gala and for you to have that moment with Colleen, and also just excited for people to hear this episode. I think there's so much information that you shared, and I know a lot of the things you said I needed to hear today. So I know that will land for a lot of other people as well. But if you could share one last message with our listeners, what would it be?
Oh, wow.
I
That's a
know,
tough
putting
one.
you on the spot.
Yeah, I have trouble deciding. My wife and I have this ongoing conversation of like, when she asks me a question, she's like, "I asked you a yes or no question. You can just answer it." And it's like, I'm having, I can't come up with the pithiest thing to say right now. No, I think for me, it's a lot of those themes that we just talked about. If you're going through it, you've got great resources in a variety of different ways, regardless of what your specific diagnosis is. Take advantage of all of the things that you can take care of in addition to your physical health. Take care of your mental health. Make sure that you're doing everything that you can do, because at the end of the day, your state of mind is the thing that's going to get you through this as much as anything elsewhere in your body. So whatever you can do, whether it's therapy or meditation or whatever it is to make you feel better about your diagnosis, learning more about what your disease is or not learning anything about it, whatever is the right decision for you, do it.
and take advantage of all of the resources that you have available. And if you're still motoring on, how can you help? Where's a way that you can help whoever this is going to happen to? And if we're funding science and funding research, hopefully there are fewer people that have sarcoma diagnosis and there's better treatment options available for them. And if it's possible to help the next people down the road, please do what you can do to help it.
If our listeners wanted to get in touch with you after today's episode, how would the best way for them to do that be?
On social media, @ClearyKen is my handle on Twitter and Instagram, or X. I can't say that I'm really on X all that often anymore, but I'm on Instagram probably more than I need to be for a almost 57-year-old man. But yeah, if people want to reach out, I'm there. And again, happy to help in any way that I possibly can.
Amazing. I'm going to go follow you right now. We'll link it in our show notes for everybody, along with many of the resources you've mentioned, and of course, the link to the information about the gala. So, Ken, thank you so much again for joining us. What a lovely morning having this conversation with you. I know I'll be taking so many things away from this conversation. So, thank you for sharing with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today. Did this episode resonate with you? You can join the discussion about this episode in our Sarcoma Stories Facebook group, linked in the show notes. If you found this podcast helpful, your feedback is incredibly valuable and helps to create more awareness about sarcoma while sharing vital resources with someone who may need it. Be sure to leave a rating and review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.